it's April Dawn. Welcome to the 93rd episode of the Sandbox. Just a few notes before we get started. The interview that you're about to hear was actually recorded back in August. And I guess that just goes to show you how busy life has been recently, that I am just now feeling like I have the space to revisit the podcast. Some exciting updates that have been happening off air, if you will, are rather exciting though. I did start this fall a membership. So if you are interested in checking it out, go to thedreamtranslator.com. I totally revamped the whole website. I decided that if I was serious about this, that it deserved its own URL. It didn't need to be redirected from another website. And I wanted to expand all the offerings to what I could fully envision it being. So yes, thedreamtranslator.com. There is a $10 a month ongoing membership subscription. That is a space where even if you're not remembering your dreams, you can be a part of small groups that discuss dreams as they come up. I feel as though it can be a very powerful tool for self-discovery and for really enriching one's journey, one's experience. Dreams can have a lot to tell us. And what I have found from being part of a dream group is that even if I'm not actively recalling my dreams, the universe seems to be speaking to me through the dreams of the people in the group who are recalling their dreams. So it seems to be that those dreams and messages are really for everybody within that container. Even if dream work is not your cup of tea, I highly recommend that you go over to patreon.com/sandboxalchemy, and I'll have that link in the show notes. But that is where I keep everyone up to date on what's going on in my life. I share the cool resources that I come across, what I'm finding interesting, what I'm listening to. I'll give my life updates on there. I was doing a newsletter for a while, and I still have access to that mailing list, but it ended up feeling like every time I went to write a newsletter, it was just this big thing that, I had to do and make sure it looked right and all the things. But when I go on to Patreon and write an update or a post, it feels more low-key. There's no pressure. It's me just sharing. And there is a free tier. So do not let a lack of funds dissuade you from signing up. And almost all of my posts are available to those who are free members as well. Again, that's patreon.com/sandboxalchemy. That, or I look forward to seeing you over at thedreamtranslator.com. So for now, enjoy this fantastic conversation with Monty. I think you're going to fall in love with her. And my apologies to Monty that it's taken me so long to get this episode out there in the world. And I also realized as I was editing that my internet connection was not ideal. And later I heard when I was editing that I had spoken over her in a few places or not heard questions that she asked. So I feel as though with the editing, I've done the best that I can to make it a good listening experience for you guys. And hopefully you won't even notice anything at all if I hadn't have said. So this is mostly for Monty. Thank you for bearing with me through that recording process. And I hope that you enjoy revisiting this conversation with me. Thank you for joining me in the Sandbox. I'm April Dawn Patterson, and I invite you to play with me and my guest today, Monty Montan. And we just talked about how to pronounce it, and so now I'm feeling Monty Montan.
There's actually no T, it's Monty, which I'm joking. I'm joking based on what you just said about that guy who didn't pronounce it that way. Sorry. I don't mean to bring up traumatic events of your past. Monty Montan, you did perfectly. That is absolutely correct. No, I'm embarrassed because I'm making bad jokes.
That's fine. Which reminds me, you were going to make some type of joke about April, remember? And then you're like, I'm so glad I
Oh,
didn't make a joke about your name.
stop. Like so many people, I'll make the name jokes and it's like they've heard it all. They don't care. They don't want to know about it. So I don't even remember what I wanted to say. Something silly, I'm sure.
Well, in this segment, we pop into a virtual coffee house before hitting the Sandbox. And being the benevolent host that I am, your order's on me. So, what order do you give the barista?
Ooh, right now I'm drinking a seltzer with bitters, but my normal beverage at a coffee shop is an almond latte, though there's a place near me that does foamed espresso over coconut water, which is such a treat, and $8, which is actually worth every penny, despite it being an $8 coffee. So those are my drink orders.
Monty is dressed to the hilt in like some type of, I don't know, retro glam. It's beautiful. I like it. The whole thing that you just said about a seltzer with bitters, it kind of fits this image right now of you. But tell
I
me,
need a different glass, but
yeah. So, but since I know nothing about what a seltzer with bitters even is that just kind of like a ginger ale? Is that the seltzer? And then what are bitters?
so here, let me pull out the bottle. We have Angostura aromatic bitters, and I think it's like an orangish flavor bitter. I don't actually know, but it's distinguished from all other aromatic bitters by its fine flavor and aromatic odor. So it's a delightful flavor and aroma that has become extremely popular for use in soft drinks, cocktails, and other alcoholic beverages, an exquisite flavor to soups, salads, vegetables, gravies, blah, 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 blah. It's delightful. It's like yeah, how would I describe a bitters? It's like a bitter liquid that adds flavor to your beverage. It's good for digestion. There's a teensy bit of alcohol in it. 44.7% alcohol per volume, but I use 10 drops. So I don't know
Mm.
how much alcohol content is in 10 drops of anything. So
Well, I may get some and just add it to a beverage and be like, I'm being like Monty. Give me my bitters, darling.
get my fancy glass. I need my bitters.
Well, now that you have your beverage, let's dive right in. This segment is called I Think I Know You From Somewhere. So, in your spotlight moments, Monty, have there been any claims to fame, times that our listeners might have seen you or your work?
Hmm. My high school modeling persona was in a Dick's Sporting Good advertisement in 2006, 2005. So find me there. I'm drinking a glass of not real champagne in a maroon fleece with proper adults. I am a frequent voiceover artist on my partner's podcast, which is called Fugues, Fugues. And recently I played the mosquito voice. Where else might you have seen me? My coffee shop is Rhythm Zero in Greenpoint, Brooklyn. I'm pretty much there every morning. It's not my coffee shop, it's the coffee shop I go to. So you may have seen me there. And yeah, I just did a TikTok series this spring called 100 Days of Zhuzh, and it was 100 days of zhuzhing up something. So I think I even used the bitters in the soda water as a way to zhuzh up your water, and zhuzh being to add flair to something that's maybe perceived as normal, take it to a different level of jazziness, finesse, beauty, and jazz it up a bit.
That reminds me of two things. One was the question, do you find you do a lot of your best work at the coffee shop? Do you have to go there to think? And the reason why I asked that
Mm.
is because I just listened to a podcast called The Good Wolf, I think it is. And they were interviewing a famous writer, and she was talking about how when COVID hit, the format that she had had that worked for her, where she could really get those books and everything out, all of a sudden she didn't have her coffee shop to go to anymore. And for her, even though she had a nice house, the inspiration, the ability to write was not in that nice house. It was getting out and being
Mm.
among other people. So, can you speak to that first, and then I'll remember my second question.
Yes, one question at a time is great. So we have a 1-year-old, and that makes it hard to focus on anything in this house other than the 1-year-old. We have one bedroom, and even my partner's office is in the middle of the living room. So that would mean I'm working either in the kitchen or on the couch in the living room, sometimes in the bathroom on the chair that we have in there. I live in Brooklyn, so it's a small apartment. So practically speaking, it makes more sense to be in a space where I'm not needing to, I don't feel the need to jump in and take care of a toddler's wants, needs, desires. And then, yeah, speaking to that artist or that author's experience, I think for me, it's being in a space where people are, perhaps it's presumptuous to say this, but doing their best. I feel like when you come to a coffee shop, you come to read or you come to work on something, or maybe you're writing, perhaps you're visiting with a friend or having a business deal. And it's this energy of potential, possibility, newness. I think people drink their coffee and I'm reinvigorated. I have this new zest for life because of this amazing caffeine drink that I'm having. And so it really is a space that allows for a different kind of leap into creativity, at least for me. And I do often have my headphones in because if I don't, then I will be trying to pick up other people's conversation in the middle of doing whatever I'm doing, which is so fun and entirely distracting. But just being in that presence of however many other people and getting that energy buzz, that like caffeine buzz, really does something for my enthusiasm. It may not get me through a stuck space, but I get excited about working when I'm in that kind of environment.
Well, I can just see myself already the next time I'm at a coffee shop. I'd be like, oh, Monty would be so disappointed. I'm not doing my best. I'm not at my best today. I'm not bringing it.
But maybe from your end, from my end as the observer, I bet I would see differently. Like I feel like people walk in, even they're in their PJs, walking their dog, or in their workout clothes, maybe going to class or not. They're doing something. They got out of their house, they're doing something with their day. Like
Mm.
it says a lot more about you, I think, than maybe you're giving yourself credit for.
And then the second thing, I loved the 100 Days of judging things. It reminded me of the
Yeah.
book Pussy, a Reclamation. Have you read it?
Oh, no, but
Okay.
it's on my list now.
One of the things that it says to do, one of the exercises, is one thing a day to pussify it. So adding that little extra care suggested, for example, your purse, right? Take the time to pussify your purse. Make it something that's beautiful, everything's in its place that you want to use. Pussify everything where it's sacred. And so it was along those similar lines of just adding that zhuzh to something once a day for 100 days.
So sad I did not think of the term pussify. She definitely, that's a brilliant alternative word to use. Yeah, same thing, basically. And it's fascinating when you do start thinking about something, even a small thing to work on, to prettify, to step up a notch, to make better in some way. When you start thinking about it that way, I really was fast and loose with the rules. It wasn't like, oh, I'm gonna something in my wardrobe every day. There was one day where I was just in a shit mood and I was talking to myself in a terrible way. And I was actually referring to myself as poo poo face and doo doo head. I was able to laugh at later, but that day was zhuzhing up the way that I talk to myself. And like, if I can appear to be a poo-poo face and a doo-doo head inside of my own brain, can I also be like a magical rainbow unicorn head in my own brain? Why does that one have to be true where the magic, wonderful, amazing things I could say about myself are not true? So reframing that. And that's like, I'm not sure how that author refers to pussifying, but when you're doing something for 100 days, it's like you kind of have to give yourself some liberties and step outside of what one might consider the norm of zhuzhing, whatever you definition you subscribe to it.
Well, guests are asked to choose a word or phrase that they would like to hear used more often in everyday conversation, something that doesn't get enough play or enough airtime. And listen to this. The prior guest chose for you the word pleasure. So you are tasked to try and somehow fit that into our conversation today.
I love it. Yes. Pleasure is such a good word. Right along the lines of pussify. So that's perfect.
Now you get to choose a word for the next guest to dance with, and it could be a peculiar word that you find funny or just something that's resonating with you in this moment. So what are you laying down for them to pick up?
I just learned about this word yesterday, and I'm sorry to the next guest because it's definitely one that I would have a hard time incorporating into conversation, but I loved it so much. It's Jouska, and it's a hypothetical conversation that you compulsively play out in your head. And I am the queen of Jouska-ing, at least as far as how I perceive my own mental experience. And so I wonder how that next guest will be able to relate to the word Jouska.
And spell that for me, please.
It's Jouska.
Okay, just like it sounds. Okay.
Yep. It was such a fascinating word.
Yeah, that is maybe really fascinating for them to fit in. I may need to give them a heads up on that one. I usually don't do that. It's usually very spontaneous, but they may need a little help with that one. I'm not sure.
Definitely the definition, yes.
Well, let's talk about how you and I connected. I think we connected via Holisticism Hub's Free Offering Friday. I switch it up. Sometimes I'll put out there, hey, I'm doing a free tarot reading. And then the next week I'll say, hey, I'm doing a free astrology reading. And then the next week, okay, I'm offering dream interpretations. And then I just kind of rotate through those things. So you ended up taking me up on an astrology reading. So that was really fun. Then from there, did you put an offering up on Free Offering Friday as well? Or did I just look up your website and fell in love?
It's been a while since my Free Offering Friday gift offering was up. So I may have spoken about my Substack or something, and then it took you there. But let me just say to you, I mentioned this to you after the astrology reading, but to all the listeners who may not know, April, you were so humble in your offering on the Free Offering Fridays and saying that you were still learning. And so it was to develop your skill sets. And I am speaking from a very novice, ignorant of astrology perspective. The only stuff I know is the things that I read in my horoscopes. I do not know the science of it, but I was blown away by how thorough and in-depth your astrology reading was and the personality you brought to it, and just like you made it fun. It wasn't just a delivery of news. It was so amazing. So thank you for that. And like, listeners, definitely get an astrology reading because it was one of the best that I've ever had. So thank you for that. It brought me so much pleasure to learn about myself from you and your reading. Ding, ding, ding. Word of the day.
You did it. Well, thank you so much for that. That is incredible to hear. Sometimes I'll get word pictures in my head. I think this is kind of like how it's playing out, or this is the word picture I'm getting. And some of the language that was coming up, I was like, oh, dang, I hope Monty's not a very, how am I going to say this? dry, very uptight person because the words that were coming up to describe the stuff was very colorful. I'll just put it that way.
It was amazing. It was so good.
Thank you so much for that. Okay, I put this in my newsletter, and I think I mentioned it in one of my solo episode most recently on the podcast, but I told everyone to go look at your website because it is an experience. It is an experience. I was saying that I have never had so much fun just going to a website and signing
Cool.
up for a
Thank you.
newsletter. You know, that's usually like, okay, da 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 da. But this was so interactive. It was so fun. You had those get to know you questions, and I just felt like as much as you can get a sense of someone's personality or excitement, it was all there. And so it was really
Mm.
enjoyable to sign up for the newsletter and look at your podcast. Reading about you on the website, I'm interested in hearing the story, and you can go in as in depth or not as you want, but there seems to be a transition from Melissa to Monty, according to this website, like reading between the lines. So, what does that mean to you, that transition, and how did that happen?
Yeah, good catch on that. I was like, did I ever explicitly say that? I think you did read between a few lines there. So, magnifying glass award to you, Miss Detective. But in college had many different nicknames from people. Montan is my last name. People would call me that. Mimi Mon by many friends that I had lived with for a while.
So to say, I can see
Mimi
you being a
nicknamers.
Mimi with what you're wearing today. That's kind of
Thank
cute
you.
Mimi vibes.
I love it. I love Mimi. So Melissa was always cool. I don't know. I never had a problem with it. But when I moved to New York in 2011, and then in 2013, 2012, I always forget, I met one of my greatest friends and we kind of nicknamed each other. And she is from the South, but also had lived in Detroit for a while. So she says about, and she's not Canadian or anything. She just has that Michigan, very small part to her accent. That's the only part of it that's Michigan sounding. And so, because she sounded like a Canadian speaker to me, I said, oh, well, let's nickname you Maple. And so I think she had been calling me, or maybe another friend had been calling me Monty. And then we kind of stuck to Maple and Monty and had even started to write a pilot for a show that's very similar to Broad City. So it's a good thing we didn't try to get it out there because it's not even close to as amazing as that was. But um because I had like a partner in crime in taking on a new persona, it made it far more enjoyable to really dive into that self. And it became slowly, I would say over 5 or 6 years, my name and what was Melissa to people that I worked with, or I mean, my family still calls me Melissa, but other people that had already known me eventually just turned into Monty across the board, other than my parents and my siblings. But it's certainly been one of those things where I feel like Melissa has a certain air to it that I never really identified with, in that it feels more buttoned up, as you were referring to earlier,
Thank you.
maybe
Yeah, that's what I was looking
uptight.
for. Yeah.
And yeah, and so it I always refer to it as like, it sounds like a Melissa will have tea with the Queen, which, that was when the Queen was alive. God bless her soul. But Monty would also have tea with a queen, sure, but it doesn't necessarily ring that direction when you hear it. And I think that it just kind of fit the person that I was wanting to become in my mid 20s. So it's stuck.
Okay, so for those who don't know what you do a whole bunch of different stuff. Does that make it harder? Like if your clients do a bunch of different stuff, I would imagine that would be a little bit more difficult helping them come up with some type of branding or design when they do multiple things as opposed to just one. But yet you yourself, you definitely probably could relate to them because you do so many different things yourself. So how do you approach a client that comes to you and they have several different things that they do out in the world?
Most of the work that I do with clients, so I think a lot of the stuff you're referring to is in my portfolio where I have paintings and I have cheese boards and I have merchandising and I have events, decor, and interiors, and then styling. And so when I work with my clients, it is very focused on helping them to develop their own personal brand via their wardrobe, their interiors, and or their events. And so the nuance that I bring to it is that it's more that I act as the guide to help them connect with their intuition and develop that persona, that personal brand, that way that they speak to the world, what I refer to as their own language of aesthetics through their intuition, their soul self, their capital S self, their higher self, their deeper knowing. And so it really doesn't matter what they do because it's not really from that linear 3D plane that we're working with. It's from that self that spans far greater, far deeper than anything that your resume might say, anything that your hobbies might include. And so the intention is to encompass all of the layers and the parts of us by tapping into that most true version of ourselves and being able to dress or decorate or post from that space, which eliminates the need to fit somebody into this box versus that box versus this. It can all kind of stem from this deep place and then influence the outside world. Does that answer your question? I feel like I kind
I
of
think
went off on a couple
so.
of different.
Yeah. So are you tapping into your own intuition, psychic stuff, or leading questions to help someone answer those things for themselves?
It's mostly through meditation that we tap into their intuitive self, into their soul self, and by giving that self space to speak, then teaching the body that it's okay to live from a place of change and expansion and growth, through nervous system regulation tools, and just reminding ourselves that through small steps we can make big lasting changes instead of a massive before after makeover. It's less of that and more of let's integrate all that we're learning from these meditations, from this time with our soul selves, slowly into our lives so that we can make a big impact over time rather than like all the makeover shows that used to happen where it was before or after. And then people just kind of, I don't know personally, but I would imagine have a hard time feeling comfortable and safe with all of those changes, especially when they go back to their real life where they're showing off their new look to their family and friends. So it's a gentle titration process, if you will, like small amounts at a time. By just sitting with that intuition, by being with it as a presence and as a voice and as a thing that provides imagery and textures and sensations, and giving that the space to speak rather than me being the know-it-all expert, because that's not true. I don't know what you need. I don't know what's best for you, but I can give you the space to talk to that part of you and learn what's best and what most accurately reflects who you are.
Okay, so your regular client would be someone then that needed a little bit of guidance, connecting with what makes them tick. Maybe they don't even know what they like or what makes them happy. And so you're, like you said, providing that space for them to connect with that, touch that. So how does that look like? Is it weekly sessions with you for 6 weeks, or how does that usually play out?
Yeah, so I do one-off calls with people to it's technically two calls. One is a short introduction call to get to know people, and then the second one's more of diving into that space, just so maybe they can get their feet wet and see how it feels to be in touch with that self. Because, like you said, not everybody's familiar with it. Not everybody speaks the language that we speak by being a part of holisticism, by being a part of communities where it is more spiritual and open to a possibility of more than just what we're sensing with our physical senses in our bodies. That kind of gives a brief glimpse into what that experience could be like. And then there's another 3-month process where we meet pretty much bi-monthly, depending on what the person needs, and develop their language of aesthetics and get them to understand who that self is, their soul self, their intuition. But they perhaps don't have as much time to do a deeper integration. And then there's a longer process for about 6 months where we, through their soul self, learn some of the rules, quote unquote, of styling. And then they can feel more confident seeking out direction from the more logistic mental space to then check in with that soul self to see what aligns. And that gives more of the tactical, practical side of style, more of the language of like TikTok or of what not to wear or whatever those makeover shows are that people are like, here's an A-line skirt and here's your seasonal color palette and those types of things. And personally, I don't love to teach that first. I think that it needs to be, here's your intuition, here's how you can connect with that part, and then here's some information that if it aligns with that intuition, then you can start implementing in the changes you want to make, because then you're just still working from the mind, which the mind is a great tool and a great resource to have. But I think so much of life we've surrendered to the mind completely, as opposed to living from that soul, that spiritual side of ourselves, this energy that we come here as, and then making edits from the mind. If we can form something from the soul, the intuition, and then refine based on practical things like the weather through the mind, then that's a nice pairing, as opposed to letting the mind do all the heavy lifting.
So with this strong focus on intuition, what is your journey with intuition? Did you realize at some point, hey, I can't hear what my soul is saying, and let me learn from someone, take this class or read this book that changed it for you? Or tell me about that.
Talking to it now, actually.
Okay, checking in. That's awesome.
So what's coming up is being raised in a religious household. My parents were Catholic, and I went to Catholic school for my entire childhood. I certainly had a connection to spirituality in that it was taught to me every day, because it was taught to me through the man, in quotes, in a system that I didn't necessarily agree with and still don't necessarily agree with. I rebelled against it. And so I then went into a lot of research on my own, and research through reading, research through listening to podcasts, and gosh, watching like The Secret. My God, that was one of the first woo-woo looks into that world that I ever had. And Abraham-Hicks and all of these things where they talk about manifestation and working with spirit and the divine. That was all really important for me to be able to accept the language differently than what I had been taught growing up. And yet it also felt very systematic and a part of some rules that I didn't necessarily align with. So honestly, over the last 5 or 6 years has been when it's really started to be a practice that I've had of tapping into that intuition, either through journaling or meditations, doing a lot of plant medicine journeys. That's been certainly a way that I've been getting into the deeper realms that I may have been fearing for a long time. And then by just practicing consistently, and it's always a work in progress. I just did an experiment recently where I dressed in the same plain black clothes every day for 21 days to see how people would respond and how I would feel. And like, I must have all these eureka moments, and I'm going to change. I'm going to come out of it a whole new woman. And nothing happened. It was just boring, and no one really even noticed. And I was like, oh, nobody really cares what we wear. It doesn't actually matter. So it's for me. It's definitely all for me, because that guy that I saw every day at the coffee shop, that woman that I'm friends with, nobody noticed really. Maybe one time somebody said, did Monty wear that yesterday? All that to say, it was a mental game that I was playing. And then I had to remember to tune back in with the intuition when I get dressed in the morning, to not have to think through my whole closet and try to catalog it and make a decision from that place, but to really feel into it when I'm seeing my clothes in front of me and letting that part of me decide, so that I can take the pressure off myself, because it can just be a fun game and I don't have to take it so seriously and stress so much, because literally nobody cares.
Yeah.
It's so freeing. It's such a weight off the shoulders to know that no matter what we do, most of the time, it's not going to be noticed enough or cared about enough for it to even. And by that, I'm speaking specifically for how we present ourselves to the world. Sure, there are things that we can do that will matter, but that was, at least as far as the way that I get dressed in the morning, it took a lot of the pressure off. And I think that it opens up the space to really play and experiment, because it doesn't last with people as long as I thought it would. So it's all fun and games.
You said already that you don't know a lot about astrology. So it's not as though you're pulling clients' charts and saying, oh, well, according to your astrology, you should be doing this or that, or incorporating this into your style or aesthetic or anything like that. It's just like intuition, right?
No,
Yeah.
but maybe we should partner. We could do a merge of, here's what your astrology says you could do, and here's what your intuition agrees with or doesn't. Because again, it's like one of those rules or one of those guidelines, those boxes that we can choose to take from or not. And so I think that that would be fun. It's not something that I know enough about to be able to use.
It's fun because I follow Amanda at Barney and Flo podcast, and she has a Astro Style workshop where she tells
Cool.
you some things to try and incorporate into your sense of style. It gave me that permission to play and incorporate different elements that I wouldn't have thought about. And
Yep.
they were actually very positive experiences, and I got great feedback from the people I was interacting with. And I don't know, so it seemed it seemed to work. But yeah.
And I think that no matter what we're taking in as far as information, it's like when you get your chart read, just in general, that feels really good to me. I really align with that information that astrology reader gave me about my fourth house and that sign and the planet that's in there. And so it's like you can take that as something that you apply to your life, or you could be like, cool, thank you, but I don't want that. I don't want to use that right now. Maybe it'll apply later. So I think it's exactly like this with that. I love that, how they're providing some insight based on the charts. I think that that's another lovely way to step outside of your own narrow-minded, and that's not to say anyone's narrow-minded, but we do see life in a certain way. We have biases, we have information that we've obtained that then directs our focus in a certain way. And if we can step outside of that and break our own mold every once in a while, I think any way we can do it is so wonderful. So whether it's astrology readings for your style or through your intuition, or even through your color palettes based on spring, summer, winter, fall, like whatever it is, try it, see how it feels.
Yeah, I think there's definitely all different kinds of ways of accessing the same information. It's funny because I've been reading a book about the North Node in people's astrology, and
Cool.
I went to the chapter that covered my husband's North Node placement, and I was like, okay, this tells you what you need to be going towards and what you need to release. And he's like, wait, don't tell me I need to stop being Mr. Nice Guy. And I was like, yeah, actually, the very first thing it said, like, things to release being Mr. Nice. So you don't have to know astrology. You don't have to know all of these things to come to some of the same conclusions. If you're really listening, whether that's life experience or your intuition or whatever it is. But yeah, I just thought that was funny.
Is he going to stop being Mr. Nice Guy now that
Mm,
you have confirmed that
I
that's something
don't know.
productive?
It's I kind of don't see that happening.
My therapist recently said something similar to me. Okay, so you take your shadow parts. I'm not saying that him being Mr. Nice Guy is a shadow part, but being the doormat is the shadow part of being a nice guy. And how can you use that in a positive way? How can that be spun into something that can be productive? We're so programmed to see our faults or what somebody labels as our faults and then run away from it screaming and hiding. Okay, but maybe that's something that you can use for good. And what does that allow him or me or you or anybody whenever we learn about these things that we don't necessarily like, or astrology, or somebody tells us we shouldn't be keeping around so much? It's like, well, we're not going to get rid of it, but how can we implement it in a way that it feels good, or it's productive, or it's a benefit to me or you or the rest of humanity? So I think that that's important information to then twist, to spin into something that can be beneficial.
Yeah, I agree. There was a lady named KP, and I think she's the podcast that I'll be putting out right before yours. But she did an astrology reading for me. What I told her struck me as being so amazing about the reading that she did was that people will tell you, hey, let's try to make lemonade out of lemons. And the way she phrased it, it wasn't even lemons to begin with. You weren't having to make something of a bad situation. It was a gift that I had in this chart. And she was able to be like, oh, wow, this is the archetype of a great writer. And she was able to pinpoint different things. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's not a liability. Which,
Yes.
I mean, it could be. I know that like, there are definitely challenges to those placements, but it was just so liberating to be able to see it from her eyes as a gift and this amazing thing that she was a little bit jealous of. um, Instead of like I said, a liability.
Yeah. How nice to not feel cursed by our own makeup. Like,
Yeah,
it's pretty
right.
cool.
It's that whole process of becoming your own friend. It can be really challenging. So, especially when I feel like my experience of growing up in a very strict religious upbringing was that you aren't to trust yourself, and at your core that you are a sinner and all of these things. So just changing the narrative, it's a lot to try and undo that. Those first 15 years or whatever it is, those are very crucial years, and it feels like it kind of gets imprinted. And now I'm trying to spend the rest of my life to befriend myself. And like you said, with that ongoing narrative in my head, how can I zhuzh up how I speak to myself even? So,
Takes a lot of work. Or it doesn't. I don't know. It doesn't have to, I guess. That's just sort of my experience. So it takes a lot of work. I'm sure not everyone has that same journey, but yeah, it feels like reparenting ourselves is as I don't, it feels like one of my life missions. I can't speak for everyone, but it's such a fascinating thing to learn to love ourselves, if accept ourselves, if not love ourselves.
who do you want to work with and how can they find you?
I want to work with anyone who is ready to embrace their most vibrant self in order to make a more beautiful world. I think that so much of this work is seen as very superficial and shallow, perhaps. And my goal is to make it far more than that, so that it's, at the risk of being cliche, like coming home to yourself. And by reconnecting with that being, that you can really feel like your most authentic, truest version of you. And so if you're ready for that kind of an embracing of what's always been there, then let's chat. I think that the world needs more people living from their most self, their most themself. And that doesn't mean speak the truth and just say everything that comes to your mind, but speak that truth from your heart that's maybe been lying dormant because someone once told you that you were inherently a sinner. And it's like, okay, that's something that you learned, but that's a box that someone put you in. And so you don't have to live in that box. Let's get out of it. And if you're ready to get out of it, you can find me through Instagram, through my website, through TikTok, through Substack, and it's all Monty Montan. Montan is the last name, Monty for Monty. I have a lot of stuff out there that's me expressing myself. And so you don't have to sift through all of it unless you really want to learn more about me. But if you just want to get in touch, then my website's probably best to learn more about my offerings and what that looks and feels like.
Mm. Well, speaking about truth and so forth, because I am interested in astrology, I just took a peek at your chart before we started, and for your MC, you have Saturn and Uranus both there, which I think is a really fascinating dynamic to have, because I would think that Saturn, it is one for rules, and it loves structure, and it wants things that can stand the test of time. It loves truth and getting to the bones of something. But then Uranus is also there keeping things fresh and poppin' and not stale. So I think it's a really fascinating, I think it's a very unique thing that we're all unique and we have our own special sauce that we bring to the world. But I think with that being in your 10th house of career and what you're known for out in the world, I think it's really awesome that you help other people connect with their intuition and aesthetic style.
Language of aesthetics.
Language of aesthetics. Well, I love how in the Lifestylist podcast, Luke Story, he ends his pods asking his guests this question. So I include it in mine because I loved it so much. Who have been 3 teachers or teachings in your life that you might share with our audience that they could go research and also learn from?
Yay, I love this question. And I was having a hard time thinking of it because there's so many people all the time that I want to shout out, but I'll speak to the 3 that are most present now. I've been working with my relationship with money for a while, and Kate Northrup, it's Northrup, she does a class called Relaxed Money, which in my opinion, it is the perfect melding of seeing money as an energy and also the tool that it is. And so using it in both ways or relating to it in both ways. And it also incorporates a lot of working with the nervous system to feel more safe, which is how I was inspired to incorporate that into my own practice. Because had I not had that part, I would be doing the same thing I've been doing my whole life of just feeling the tenseness around the money stuff. And, oh, I don't want to talk about it. It makes me so uncomfortable. But by helping to expand the capacity of my body and my mind, I've been able to change my relationship to it in an extremely amazing way. So she has a website and Instagram and everything you can check out. And then I brought my books for these 2. So Rob Bresney wrote the book Pronoia, and he is an astrologist. And through his Substack, he does weekly newsletters with beautiful wisdom that he takes from other people, but is also his own. And then he writes really fun, unique horoscopes every week. And he has a new book out that I had out because I could not remember the name of it. Astrology is Real, that came out in 2023, that I have not read, but perhaps that would be for you or anyone who is interested in astrology. But he's one of my first introductions into seeing the world in a different way and seeing how it can benefit us, and how it's his book, this one, Pronoia, the antidote for paranoia. And so just how the universe is conspiring with blessings for you, curses, as we were speaking about with our shadow selves. And the book that I've been slowly making my way through, not because it's hard to read, but because I have a 1-year-old, is The Creative Act, A Way of Being by Rick Rubin. And anyone who is creative at all, I would highly recommend it. This is certainly not a niche book. I mean, a small subset of the world knows. I'm sure you've heard of it. It's very popular right now. So I brought that on as certainly not trying to break the mold with that recommendation, but it's been really one of those books that has been reminding me of the magic of just being creative on a regular basis and how to play in our creativity and see it in a different way than I've been taught in the past. So that's a fun one.
Mm. Yeah, I've been listening to that one on Audible. So that's
Yeah.
been fun. Yeah.
I've heard the audiobook is very good, that he's an excellent narrator. So
Yeah, it's good. The part where I last finished listening to it, 'cause I will listen in installments too. It was talking about how even when you're outside, because the world's constantly tilting, the sun is never going to be hitting your face the exact same way. The breeze is never going to be the exact same breeze on your face twice. There's going to be something where if you're paying attention and noticing, it's not static at all. There is a creative act happening at all times, even with you not doing anything. If you're there to observe, you can see the creativity all around you and just kind of breathe that in. But
yes. Okay. And while you were speaking, speaking of the light, I think this is the word I just was looking up quickly. Ichigo, ichigo, ichie. I'm probably terribly screwing up the pronunciation, but it's a tea party in Japan. I don't even know that it is the tea party. It's just the idea that you can never have the same tea ever. It will never be the same, even if you have the same people, the same place, the same leaves. It is always only this one time, and the beauty of this profound moment being never the same as any other moment. And I haven't gotten to that part of the book, but I think that's exactly what I thought of when you were speaking to that. Just like, yes, the light is always different. The wind is different. Ourselves are so different every single time.
mm-hmm. Exactly. Well, before I close out, was there anything that you wanted to leave listeners with?
The phrase that came to my existence, to my mind, if you will, was just be silly, just go play. So that's what I'm working on these days. And I think, especially in these times of being, it's hard to see the fun and the beauty and the love in the world. And there's a lot of it. So hopefully we can keep reminding ourselves that we get to celebrate even when things are appearing to crumble around us.
Mm. Yeah, I will take that as a personal message because that's one of the things that I've carried from my childhood was, and I'm not even going to say which parent, but it was the admonition to don't be silly. And so it's for you to give that permission here in closing. I just really appreciate that. That's awesome.
Yeah. Thank you, parent, for that teaching that probably gave you something in your life. And now it's like, okay, let's try the other thing. Let's try to actually embrace the silly
Mm-hmm.
when it feels
Well,
right.
thank you, Monty, so much for joining me in the Sandbox. Much love to you.
Thank you so much for having me. This was such a blast. I really appreciated it. And anytime you want to do it again, just let me know.
Okay, I'll do that. All right, have a good night.
Bye, April.